Hello, YouTube. Just wanted to wish you all a very happy and safe and prosperous new year. If you've been following this channel anytime, then you know that we just previously did an episode where I showed the area where I first started when the whole Facebook Living in a Van page was born, and then later on the group, and finally the YouTube channel. And then I showed you the changes that Little Bluetooth has undergone. I thought it would be interesting to start the new year with a retrospect type video showing my past vans. It won't show all of them, but it'll show the vans from 6 years ago. I originally started full-time living in a van back in, I think it was like January or so of 2013. Yeah, so we're going to go all the way back and look at the creation of the website as well as my vans. You can see here's the logo for the stealthvan.com website and some of the pages and links and stuff I had posted on the Facebook group. I actually created the Facebook group as I was prepared to move into my van full time. And essentially what I did was I moved into a 2006 Dodge Grand Caravan with the stow and go seating, and I ended up living in Jupiter while I was working as a mailman. And you can see here, these are the pictures that I shot, and you can see the dates. See if we can get this thing to focus. Having a hard time focusing here. But this picture here was shot November 4th, 2013, which is the day I woke up at the Jupiter Inlet. Let me try to zoom out a little, maybe that'll help. Alright, there you go. Maybe we can see more now. I'm sorry I'm having to resort to filming a computer monitor. I tried to do a screen capture with software, but my computer's just too slow. So hopefully you'll be able to see here what's all going on and actually hear me talk clearly and not have all the lag and other issues I was running into with trying to basically record live video on a computer screen. Anyhow, this is the view that I had every morning when I woke up in the van, and it became the banner, the masthead for the Living in a Van pages and the YouTube channel. And it was essentially my morning view. You can see here, this is the original van that I had. It was a 2003 Dodge Grand Caravan, and you know, I set that cooking rice using a power inverter and a rice cooker. While the rice is cooking, I am charging the laptop phone, etc. I cook the rice outside because it produces a lot of steam, and I don't want that in the van. You also notice the van is gray. That was Mr. Gray, my first full-time stealth van that I lived in when I moved full-time into van life in 2013. You see the date here is November 12, 2013. I'd been living in the van for probably about a month or two at that point. And even then I was using an inverter cooking system. I had a 350 watt inverter, and I just simply, parked at the boys' park and took out my rice cooker, my portable emergency bathroom, and cooked on it. So this is kind of how living in a van evolved, just to show you the rice was indeed cooking. And we didn't have videos back then because I didn't post on YouTube or even Facebook. I was just kind of sharing with the Living in a Van group how I was doing it and just posting pictures. Now, I wonder if Keith and Sheila here are still watching my channel on YouTube, if they've ever made the transition from Facebook to YouTube. So if you're watching this, Keith or Sheila, give me a call out. I want to see how many of the original people are still here from the very first days of living in a van. This picture that you're looking at right here, I'm just kind of going out of order, just clicking stuff, is actually my van parked in stealth mode. Mr. Gray was unique because Mr. Gray had a special button that when I pushed, it went into stealth mode. And this is what the stealth mode looks like in the van. It was actually invisible. See, photo of my stealth van. Isn't that cool? Anita, if you're here, Robert, if you're here and watching this video, give me a shout out. I wonder how many of the original people are still around. So let's take a look at some of the pictures. We're not going to go through too much detail, but to point out, I did start right away showering in, I was at the Jupiter Fitness Center and later on Gold's Gym, and talked a little bit about using vacuum cleaners to clean your car and watching how to keep the circuit from blowing the fuse. I did have a solar panel back then. It was like I think it's like a 5-watt panel, which is useless really, but I used it to keep my battery topped off. And I simply just ran this line here out to my vehicle battery and charged it to keep it topped. And here you can see I'm trying to see, I think I showed, I don't know what this is, maybe an error, but I think it showed the wire running underneath here. I don't know why I'm showing that picture. This is what it looked like when it came into under the hood. This is the wire from the solar panel, and it just came straight to the battery, and that's how I kept things charged. Now, that van also had the ability to use the inverter here, which I put under the hood. This was a 350 watt inverter that I had. This one's inside the vehicle. And what I did back then was I actually had a battery pack that I had made using this. Even, you know, the battery pack is still kind of working right now. But this one had a 350 watt inverter, and it could have cooked the rice on it. But I had no means of charging it back up quickly. I was doing some weird stuff, like I was charging the house battery using a 120 volt battery charger running through the 12 volt cigarette lighter through an inverter that was converting it back up to 120 volts, and then running the battery charger, which is a 120 volt charger, through that to convert it back down to the required amperage for charging the house battery, which was crazy. But that's what I did. It wasn't very efficient. It worked, but the maximum rate of charge was like 6 amps, and when I went 6 amps, a lot of times the fuse blew in the cigarette lighter. We've come quite a long way since then, but that's what I did before I wired the vehicle to get direct 12 volt charging off the alternator. You can see here, even back then, I had 120 volt access inside the vehicle. This was a power strip that was mounted in there and hooked up to the house battery. And the reason I did that was my whole vehicle, entertainment and every other system in there was actually still 120 volts, not 12 volts. So I was able to run the computer and other devices in there. This is the actual charging system, which was, you know, a dedicated 120 volt charger that had 6 amps, 4 amps, and 2 amp charging. So I would charge it at 6 amps at maximum, but it tended to blow the fuse, so I normally went 4 or 2 amps and charged the battery that way. It could only be done really while I was driving, and basically this unit here was 120 volts. It plugged into this 225 watt inverter, which had a plug that went into the cigarette lighter. It was a way of doing the charging system without hooking up directly to the vehicle battery and running any wires, you know, outside. And it worked, and I used it for probably about 6 or 7 months before I decided to upgrade. And even back then, I didn't really have good phone service. I was still on the dollar, I mean the Walmart $15 a month or $9 a month mobile plan. So I used a Garmin navigation system to navigate around. I was working as a mailman, U.S. Postal Service at the time, and living in Jupiter, which paid pretty decent money, but because of child support, I was paying like 85%. So what I was earning wasn't enough to live off, especially in the Jupiter. If you're familiar with this area, Jupiter's kind of a very expensive area to live. During my off times, I hang out at the casinos. Probably not the best move. Even back then, I was looking at getting a portable battery pack. This was one that I had intended to give away, but I think it was Tom that wanted it, but then he didn't want it. So he ended up sending me the money back to give to my children. So we spent it and had a good time with it. Thank you very much, Tom. I will always remember that kindness. But this was the battery pack I was going to give to viewers back then. It has a built-in 120 volt inverter, but I think it's only a 150 watt inverter or 120 watt inverter. Not that powerful, but enough to run small devices like computers, you know, laptop computers, lights, and things like that. And it was portable. So this is a system that I do kind of recommend getting something like this if you're just new to van life and don't have a lot of money. For $100, you can get one of these things. And you can charge it, I think, through the cigarette lighter, or if you want a faster charge, it may be possible to charge it by hooking it up to the vehicle battery while you're running the car, and that you charge it in about 15-20 minutes, or maybe even less. Back then, I actually did have a microwave in the vehicle, and was testing a 700 watt microwave, so I had to upgrade my inverter to a 750 watt inverter. And while the system worked, I did an initial test. I don't know if I have the picture here of my test. Yeah, here's the first test. It was to make hot cocoa for my kids, because I get the children every other weekend. And this is before I figured out that I could actually heat hot water using the rice cooker. And I could make hot cocoa that way if I wanted to. I actually tried to heat hot cocoa in the microwave. And it did work, but the power would run out so fast. You could only heat up like 1 or 2 cups, and then your battery was totally gone. So I let that system go. I stopped pursuing trying to put in a microwave and run that off the house system. This is the first appearance of the 750 watt inverter, and it was actually hooked up under the hood, and I ran the power here. So it was hooked up to the battery under the hood. I didn't have a house system hooked up to the alternator at the time. And I could run the power from here down the side into the vehicle and plug it into the multi-plug outlet. I don't think I ever ran it like that while I was driving, although it was possible to do that. I did it generally when I was parked somewhere at a park and I was just trying to cook rice, and you know, I hooked everything up like that. Had an issue with the tire going flat. Tried to make a battery pack out of potatoes. There was a thing on the internet saying you could make electricity using potatoes. So I saw these potatoes on sale and decided, it might be a nice joke. But even back then, Tiny was with me. No, actually, sadly, this was not Tiny. It was another squirrel. If you've been following the series at all, you know that animals and I get along pretty well generally, unless I eat them. But this was a squirrel that used to hang out with me every morning. Yeah, at Jupiter Inlet. I would go eat and he would come out and hang out with me, and then sometimes I'd give him a little bit of rice. I don't know if you notice his eyes are kind of like slanted a little bit like slits. So I think it's like an Asian squirrel. Let's see. Oh, my first Thanksgiving in the van. I was actually down at Coral Springs. I drove down to Coral Springs, Florida, which is near where I'm staying now, right now, where I am right now. It's actually near Coral Springs. But that's a really fancy Walmart. I had never seen a Walmart that fancy before, but I did stay there overnight for Thanksgiving, and ended up buying my Thanksgiving feast there. A little tip for you: if you need a refrigerator, use Walmart or the grocery store where you're at. I grabbed some cranberry sauce. I guess it's cranberry sauce when I walked into the store. And then what I did was I stuck it into one of the freezers for the fish here while I went to shop for other food items. And that would chill it real fast to make it harden up. And, you know, because you could open this up and slice it into cranberry for serving. And then I went to buy the rotisserie chicken, which was fresh off the grill, and put together the feast over here at one of the local parks off Coral Springs. So you can see my first Thanksgiving dinner wasn't too bad for living in a van. I had the rice cooker, which I cooked at a park right here. You can see there was an electrical outlet at that park. And then I had, I don't think I had mashed potatoes at the time. But I had rice, and I had gravy, and I had turkey, and I had cranberry, and I had beans. And for the drink, I had orange juice. For dessert, I had, whatchamacallit, donuts. I think I even had some Mountain Dew. That looks like Mountain Dew. And, of course, the rotisserie chicken. Now, my son wasn't able to be with me that year, but he's so cool. He ended up calling me. You know, he had designated this time for us to call and eat together. So we were on the phone talking and eating. So I didn't really spend Thanksgiving, my first Thanksgiving, alone. I had my son on the phone. But I also had followers at that time on the Living in a Van, this page right now, the Living in a Van Facebook page, not the group. It was just a page at the time. But this is just to show you the park and see how the rice cooker was plugged in and actually cooking with free electricity. And of course, I think they might have had the bathroom locked up that day, but power was still on, and I had water at that park. It was pretty cool because I went for a walk out there and did a little segment here just to tell people about the park. This is, you know, before videoing everything. And this is just some shots of the food. Then I started having problems. You know, it seems like when you live in a vehicle, the problems are more pronounced because that's not only your transportation, it's also your home. The van had a leaky power steering fluid issue with the front, one of the front wheels. and the mechanic told me it was going to be like $700 or $800 just to fix that. So I was trying to save up money to fix that, and then, you know, because I was staying a lot at Jupiter Inlet, the police ended up finding me, the Jupiter police. And they basically told me I couldn't live at Jupiter Inlet. It's like a $50 million view. So what happened was, to make a long story short, those of you who were with me at the very beginning, you remember everything that happened with me having to basically move into a house. So I found a room in Palm Beach Gardens and moved down there to live down there. And that's when things went wrong. There were some people, who, I guess hoodlums or whatever, tried to break into my van, and they actually busted in. You know, let me show you. I'll show you more of the van here later, but they busted into the van and destroyed it. Look what they did to my steering column. The 2006 Dodge Grand Caravan has like a chipped key, so it has like a chip and it'll only work on your car. Well, they busted my steering column and tried to steal it that way, but then they couldn't get it started because their key didn't match the chip. But of course, they destroyed this whole steering assembly. And then I called the dealership to see what it, and other mechanics to see what it would cost to fix this, and they said it was going to be like $1,100, $1,200. And meanwhile, I still had that problem with the leaky power steering fluid, which was like bleeding out. I was having to put in new fluid every day. Between the two, it was like $2,000 almost to fix the vehicle, which I didn't have. I didn't have $2,000. And because I was working as a mailman, what they call a CCA, a city carrier assistant, I couldn't miss any days. If I missed work, they would fire me. So I needed to keep going to work every day, even with all this. And because I was actually in a different city, living in a house, I had to take the bus. It was a pain. Those of you who were with me may recall my episodes where I show myself sitting in a bus and going to work every day. That I was not living in a bus, but I was pretty much living in a bus because I had to spend all day riding the bus to get to work and from work. And the bus only runs at certain times, and it was really rough. But this car I had to get rid of, even though I owed money on it. I'd bought it for $6,500, still owed $4,600 on it. Then it needed the $2,000 worth of repair, which I couldn't afford. So I sold it to a guy who just bought it really cheap. He got it for $600. But, you know, he would have to fix the steering column and the leaky fluid. But at the time, the car was still worth about $6,000. But I let it go. So he hauled it off. And that was the end of Mr. Gray, my first van that I lived in. It was a really nice van. This is what the interior of the van looked like. It actually had stow and go seating, which is really cool because the seat, you'll see here, my son back then was so young, he had to sit in one of these child seat thingies, booster seats. But these seats actually fold forward. And what I did was I left this one up for my son. But these two, I folded down. And it actually, the stow and go means it actually goes into the floor. So the floor became flat. And then I had like 2 or 3 sleeping bags that I rolled out. And they became my cushion for the bed. So back then my van build was not even really a build per se. Except this front part. If you'll notice, that's a computer, a keyboard there, and a table. So I had a console up here with a computer and my keyboard. So I could play movies, I could watch movies, I could play video games. And I could sit here and work like an office. So the inside, you came and you sat down, and there was a little office with a computer screen right where you're looking right here. So the keyboard was here, and there were some drawers here, which I'll show you some other views. I also had bungee cords across the top to store things like boogie boards, because my son and I like to go to the beach. The van itself was fairly stock, pretty normal, but even back then the Velcro was important for putting things up, like the my phone, which you can see this was a track phone. I don't even think it was even Android. But I used the phone mainly for entertainment. It had music, MP3s on it, and I could plug it through the cassette deck and play music through there. This is what it looked like at that Walmart that I showed you in the other video in Jupiter during one of the rainy days. And I was stuck in the van out there. You can see the solar panel wasn't picking up much power that day. and I decided to take these pictures to share with people what the van looked like inside. This is the charging system and the inverter, which charged the house battery. And you can see I had my little tool right there, my little cordless drill. And this is the inverter with the house battery back then. And the reason I had the house battery was to run systems at night, as well as my computer, which ran off 120 volts. This is what the console, part of the console, looked like. You can see my little computer back then running XP, my little Sony Vaio, was my workstation as well as my entertainment. You know, I could hook up DVDs and watch movies on there through DVDs. I did have a 2-burner electric countertop burner thing that you could plug in and cook on, which I don't think I ever really used. Maybe I used it once, but it required 12 or 1600 watts, which would mean I need a 2000 watt inverter really to run it, and I didn't want to get a 2000 watt inverter. I could only use this if I was boondock somewhere and was plugged into electrical outlet. I found that I didn't do that often. Most of the time I was cooking in the van or around the van, so I got rid of this, didn't need it. But even back then I had fans. I think I had 1 or 2 fans, the clip-on fans that ran off 12 volts. For those of you wondering what these pictures are, this woman and a cow is my mother. My mom's a cow. She was so funny. If you guys think I have a sense of humor, I wish you would have had a chance to meet my mother. She was really something else. This was my son, Nick, back in the days, when I was actually living in a house with my my then fiance. I was actually supposed to get married, but that's a whole nother complicated. It's a messed up situation, but we ended up breaking up, and that's how I ended up in the van. So this isn't my first wife. My first wife we divorced, and it was very ugly, very messy, and still being dealt with even to this day. This was a new woman I was going to marry that I was actually living with her, and we were both mail carriers and doing okay. And that kind of went away when we broke up, and I decided to make a decision to live in the van full time. Here's a better shot of the console.